it's me, PD, back with another Carlisle Cult Cinemacast. And today I'm joined with some of the esteemed writers from the latest We Belong Dead book called Euro Horror. And it's covering European horror from, I think it's 1913, and a bit of George Méliès as well, right up to 2018, which that's a hell of a lot to cover. I went through the contents today, and you guys have wrote, Ian and Simon, you two guys have wrote quite a lot for this new book when I was looking at everything. So, I will be asking some questions. We've got Eric here as well, who's the publisher. I'm right there, Anna.
You are indeed, yes, yeah.
And we will be joined by Darrell Buxton, who's the editor. He's having a few problems to get in at the moment, which is a shame, but I'm sure we'll get there. So, Eric, whose idea was it for the Euro Horror book? Because last year's it was chopped meat, and this year's is Euro Horror.
I guess it was mine originally. So we have a writers group where I throw ideas out there and then instantly regret it when people just add 101 different obscure titles. But I'd wanted to do Euro Horror one for quite a while, and a few years ago, 3 years ago, something like that, 4 years ago, we did a Century of Horror, which was more like a pictorial history, and there was a chapter on each decade. But right at the end of the book, actually Darrell did two chapters, one on Japanese horror and one on Euro horror. So I thought, well, let's expand that into a book, because it's always been a subject that's really interested me. And I thought it was, it was the obvious choice for the next We Belong Dead book, really. So that's how it originated. And then what I usually do is put the idea out there on the writers group, list a few films that I think of, and then stand back and everyone lists hundreds of more films. And then I decide which ones we're going to use, which is usually the ones off my list. I usually ignore the writers. So that's that. Yeah, that's how it started.
Oh, excellent. And looking at the contents page, it does cover absolutely everything. I don't think he's missed much out.
Well, you say that, but I got my proof copy, right, and I'm looking through it and I'm thinking, why isn't this film in, and why isn't that film in, and why did we miss this one out? And also today I spotted a huge mistake. 2017 we have Rec, and I thought, I'm sure Rec came out when I was living in Paris, and then it should be 2007. So there's a mistake already. I'm sure there might be one or two more, but it's by no means an exhaustive survey of all Euro horror. I mean, that would be impossible to do. So again, It was making the choice which ones should go in and which ones should be excluded. And pretty much the countries that dominate are Germany, France, Spain, and Italy. Although there are a few others. There's a Finnish film in there, and a Russian film, and a Swedish film. But there's those four countries really that produced most of the films that we're looking at in the book.
Excellent. And Ian, you wrote the Vampire 1930, I think it is, according to the contents, didn't you? You wrote about that one.
Sorry, which one was that? I've got to tell you, I sort of start off with a list of a few, and then people say, I can't do this anymore. Who wants to do it? And I say, well, I'll do it. And then I turn around, and next minute I've written 20. So
1930 Vampire, Julian West, Maurice Schultz.
Vampire, yes. Yeah.
Yes, Vampire, sorry.
Yeah, I have. And I love that very much. In fact, probably more than a lot of people do. There seems to be quite a lot of people that I'm looking at you, Eric. Are you not keen on it?
Yeah, well, it's a good job Darrell's not here, because he loves that film, and he's tried over the last 30 years to get me to watch it all the way through. I've tried 5 times. I just give up. It's not for me. I just find it so sleep-inducing. But perhaps that's the point of it. It's very dreamlike film, isn't it?
But of course, this is why Eric is just the Blofeld of the organisation. and we actually do the writing. So yeah, I like it, and it's just great to write about something like that. That you don't always get the opportunity. It's just nice to write about something a little bit weird, a little bit different, and just trying to encourage people to dig in and watch those old classics, and not listen to Eric, obviously.
Yeah. Eric likes Trog. Come on.
Well, the Trog book is in production. I think that's the next one. Yeah.
a one-man production, Eric and Trog. Out of the group who's obviously here today, Simon, you wrote the piece on the earliest movie, Hands of All Up, from 1924, which obviously also was remade in 1960. Why was that one of your choices?
Well, I've always loved German expressionist films anyway, purely for the weird kind of otherly look to them. And it's just something spellbinding about the whole silent genre anyway. It's just so unusual now to concentrate on the visuals, to tell a story. And I just love something about the sparseness of it. You have these empty sets. You can have just one piece of furniture and one painting, and there's this whole frame of nothing, as if to kind of externalize this man's sort of loneliness. It just this emptiness that tells so many stories. So I just kind of thought, I must have that one, please.
That's very profound.
It was rather. I don't know where that came from.
I should say,
I made that up on the spot as well.
Well, funny enough, Vampire is a bit like that as well, even though it was made in the 30s. It might as well be a silent film also at times. Yeah, I don't tend to write a lot about silence. I don't know about... You write a lot about silence, Simon?
I think actually that's the only silent film I've written about.
Yeah. So it is a little bit different, isn't it? And you kind of focusing on the visuals rather than anything else whatsoever, and it's almost a different way of writing about things.
You'd never dare to casually look at your phone whilst watching it, so you can miss so much.
Yeah, I mean, I've not seen the original, but I have seen the remake, so I'll have to check the original out.
Hardly recommend it. Yeah,
and same with I was going to another one from Ian, Unheimlich Chicken.
Well, somebody had to say it.
Yeah. Or also known as Five Sinister Stories.
Yeah, that's right. That's just a crazy film. Have you seen it? You've not seen it? It's a
no. I must admit, I haven't seen it.
It's sort of almost like a parody of all these popular genre films, just running at breakneck speed. It's and really, I suppose it suits. I must admit, if I watch something today that was made today that took that tone, I'd find it irritatingly over the top. But for a film of that era, and being silent, it works perfectly. It's it's kind of over the top, but as well as kind of almost spoofing some of the stuff that it's interpreting, it's also really quite creepy at times as well. It's nice, and there's no time to rest. You're always moving on to something different as well. So I didn't know anything about it. That was one of the ones that I just said, yep. I said, yeah, I'll do that. And then thought, I have no idea what I've just said yes to there. and sometimes I like that as a challenge. I like, it's good to write about the films you know and love and have seen a million times, but it's quite cool to dig into something that's completely new to you yourself. And it's a different challenge. Sorry?
It's a short story one that has the cask of Amontillado in it.
Yeah.
Sort
of, yeah, that's right. You have seen it?
Yeah, I watch the films, I just don't read the articles.
I was just going to say
we know that.
He just gets them and goes, yeah, that'll be all right. I'll let Darrell sort that out.
Yeah.
That's it. That's it all is now. And then you've also got, I'm kind of going through these chronological, as you can probably guess. For some reason, I do that. Yeah, a weirdo. I Vampiri, 1956, Ian. Another
Yeah.
one from you. The first Italian-made horror film of the sound era.
Absolutely. Anything involving Bava is fine by me, and it's lovely, really. And it's interesting that it takes a more sort of scientific approach. Really, it's the Gothics kind of took over later, and although there's plenty of Gothic imagery in this, it's not your supernatural vampire. It's something a little bit different, it seems, in many ways, and also presented as a bit of a police procedural, and with some very brutally callous sort of attitudes towards potential victims and actual victims, where I don't know, nobody seems to care very much about the feelings about it. It's great. It's just astonishing to look at, and perfect for black and white with the use of light and shadow.
But that's Bava is all. Do you know what I mean? It just absolutely fantastic. Knocks it every film. I've never watched a bad Bava film, to be honest.
No, I'm fully on board with that. I just think the man was an absolute genius, and of course, it's just that time when he's kind of sneaking in and taking over when, his director's apparently done a runner, and it just gave him his opportunity, and obviously he realised he was a man for directing, and so it's good he got this sort of opportunity, because then he ran with it, and look at all the stuff he did.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, obviously there's others on the list that you wrote, like Black Sabbath. You wrote that one as well, which is a phenomenal film, let's be honest. But Simon, you wrote Black Sunday, 1960. You wrote the article on that one.
Yeah.
And he's Darrell. Hello, Darrell.
Hello,
Darrell.
Hello, Darrell.
Great to be here.
It's good to have you at last, and you're not freezing and scaring us all.
What have I missed so far?
We've talked about Hands of Orlok, Vampire, Unheimlich
Geschichten.
There you go. Why did you say it again?
Yeah, I've said it twice now. You know what I mean? Probably completely ruined it, but there we go. Ian's just been talking about Ivan Piri, and I've just asked Simon about Black Sunday.
Very good.
Yeah.
I'll sit back and listen for a while.
Sorry, yeah.
Hello?
Sorry, I said, yeah. I nearly didn't go for that, because when this was written, it was back in early 2021. And I'd only actually been doing this writing since 2020. So a lot of the films I chose, to be honest, were not unknown, but maybe a little bit obscure, because I was too frightened to take on such renowned films like The Mask of Death or Black Sunday, because I thought it's too big. What if I screw this up? But what happened was a lot of titles weren't being claimed. And I kind of did the same with Ian. I was picking up titles that no one seemed to want to go for. So there were some strange ones I picked up, like Death Smiles on a Murderer and Your Vice is a Locked Room and Only I Have the Key. And then
I've got all them wrote down for coming up.
But no one went for Black Sunday. So I thought, oh, sod it. Let's, just give it a go. I mean, it's a tremendous film. There's so much you can say about it. Essentially, it's 2,000 words of me going, oh, it's good, isn't it?
But that isn't what every kind of piece of writing is, that when you're writing about these kind of films, just going, oh, this is great.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because you're writing about films you enjoy and you like.
Yeah, I mean, I've always tried to, my sort of aim is never to write an article that reads like a Wikipedia entry, to kind of put a bit of yourself into it, just to, do a bit of fan gushing, a little bit of, not too profusely, so you don't want to just sort of sound like you're just praising something you adore, you've got to point out any sort of potential faults that are there. But no, I was just so blown away from it. I thought it got to the point where I thought, no, I don't want anyone else to have this now. I'm having it.
I mean, it's got a great cast as well. I mean, Barbara Steele. I mean, it's got a great cast. Barbara Steele, you know what I mean? Who's just fantastic. Again, in just about everything she's in.
And it's so wonderfully uncompromised. I mean, the famous scene with the mallets on the mask. I mean, it may only be in black and white, but boy, do you feel that moment.
Just like an absolute classic. And next along, we had Horrible Dr. Hitchcock. Oh, God. Hitchcock, even. And that was Ian done the writing on that one.
Blimey, was it? Do you know what? I've written quite a few here, Eric, haven't I?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think yes.
Between the pair of you have written a lot. Let's be honest.
Has he done more than me? I bet he has.
Let's have a look. I'll have a quick count.
An Angel.
Not a competition, Simon.
Morgan.
I never said there was.
You can tell Ian's ones because they're always over the
Ian's done 21.
So they have to extend to 3 pages rather than 2.
Yeah, so Ian's written 21 and 1, 2, 3.
Is it 13?
13? Bang
13.
On.
Yeah.
Wow.
So Ian's absolutely chuffed with that one.
Yeah. If Ian's forgotten about Horrible Dr. Hitchcock, I'll start the ball rolling on that because it gives me a chance to try and pronounce the Italian title in my Derbyshire accent. So I love this title, L'orribile segreto del Dr. Hitchcock.
Whoa, that sounded awesome.
So
much better than my German, anyways.
Sounds like I should be sipping a cappuccino in a Rome cafe. But I think that film really shows how ahead of the game we were with this book because, of course, that's since come out on a lovely Blu-ray edition from Radiance.
Yes.
And here we are writing about it a couple of years ago, although, of course, with the vagaries of publishing and so on, our book then comes out after the Blu-ray. But there you go. I mean, what a film again! As Simon was saying about Black Sunday, it's so ahead of its time and so daring, and the whole necrophilia angle is really, really challenging. And you think, what did audiences make of films like this at the time? You know, I mean, my mum is no horror fan at all. You know, she just isn't interested in the sort of stuff I do. But in conversation with her some years ago, she did mention that as a teenager in the early 60s, she went to the cinema and saw a lot of the Roger Corman, Vincent Price movies and other movies like that. And of course, a lot of these Italian films are a sort of response to that and a response to what was happening in Britain with Hammer and other companies. And you do think, and the Euro horrors, of course, were filtering over into British cinemas in sort of cut prints and retitled and so on. But so mainstream audiences were being offered this stuff, and you do wonder, what did they make of that mallet sequence in Black Sunday? What did they make of the whole necrophilia subplot in Hitchcock? And what a great film this is! I mean, it's the colour classic to set against Barbara's black and white classic, I think. And again, Barbara Steele right in the middle of it. And Italy sort of knew something about Barbara Steele that the rest of the world didn't. And, you know, they sort of picked up on her magic and her majesty. And we lost out there, you know, we really did. And she's perfect for this film.
Yeah, I mean, Barbara Steele, I think my first Barbara Steele film will have been early 80s. It would have been Shivers.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, that would have been the first film I saw with her, and then obviously as the 80s went on, and I was able to get hold of a lot of these, you know, Euro horrors pirated, and then come the 90s and the late 90s and early 2000s and DVD, it just opened up all of these. We were all be able to get hold of all of these films more regularly, which was just great.
Which is wonderful. In my introduction, I talk about how my introduction to Euro horror. You know, I like most of us, I grew up with the old BBC double bill, so the classic Universal and the Hammers and the Amicus and the Poor films. But my first introduction was that fantastic David Perry book, Vampire Cinema, which has whole chapters on Jean Rollin, who I'm now a huge fan of, but never even heard of him. And it was that imagery and, you know, the stuff from Italy and from Spain. And then at the same time, Des Skin was doing House of Hammer, and they started to carry a lot of reviews of kind of European films, but never did I ever think I would get to see any of these films. And if you think about, you know, those classic books from the 70s, the Dennis Gifford book and the Anne Frank books, they actually had very, very little in there about European horror. It was mainly like American and UK horror. So yeah, it was Perry's book, that Vampire Cinema, that first introduced me. The kind of films that weren't being shown on TV at the time. But like you say, now it's great. You know, I mean, I've just been getting the Indicator box sets of the Jean Rollin releases. I've been slowly working my way through those. And like Darrell says, you know, the Dr. Hitchcock film has got a fantastic release very recently. So much more stuff coming out now, which is fantastic, you know.
But we're inundated with films now. There's just so much of it.
Yeah, I'm actually remembering now because Darrell was pointing out we were ahead of the game by a couple of years. But in actual fact, Eric, if you remember, you suggested the film should be written about for a previous book, and then it ended up not going in it. And
yeah, what was that?
And it's funny, really, because an awful lot. I mean, I'm not talking about Argento or Fulci or even Bava, but there's an awful lot of European films, horror films, that I've only seen because of We Belong Dead. Because these titles come up as suggestions, somebody's got to write about them, and I think some people seem a bit scared of, oh, what's that? And they kind of don't want to write about it.
Yeah.
And it goes for free, and I think, no. Let's see where this leads then. So it's kind of like a bit of a rabbit hole for me, and then I dive. So
we're glad that you and Simon are there, because you're two guys who do jump on this and will tackle films that you've not seen before, watch them,
I did
and then
exactly the same thing, Ian.
Not everybody's capable of this. Not everyone is capable of watching a film and then being able to go and write about it in a sort of analytical way, you know, in an informed way. You guys can, because you've got such a knowledge of the other films that surround the new ones that you're watching, or the ones that are new to you, that you can fit that in. You can watch a Barbara Steele film, for instance, that you've never seen before, but then write very confidently about setting that within her career, you know, and approach it in that way. So it's great that you do, and it's very helpful to me and Eric.
Well, that's good. And you kind of then think, you know, right, we're in the 1960s here. Hammer are doing what Hammer are doing, and then Dr. Hitchcock comes out with the necrophilia themes, and you think, blimey, it's no wonder Hammer ended up, you know, going out of business eventually, because immediately, even in the 60s, Italy's throwing that sort of thing out.
Yeah, there's a challenge there, and everybody can keep up.
Yeah, but I've never watched it, so I watched it for this other book, and then Eric, where's that film? So I thought, I've watched it for nothing, but then of course I didn't mind, because I thought it was a brilliant film, and that's why I'd forgotten I'd done it for Euro Horror, because it's not in my Euro Horror folder on my laptop. It's probably in Unseen Horrors or something like that, Eric.
Could be, yes, yeah. I mean, I don't read them anyway, so
no,
any book.
No.
Put some up on the board and throws darts at them.
That's why we've got two editors on each book. Eric doesn't read them, and I do. So I don't know what Eric does on the books, frankly. But
He literally just looks at the pictures.
I look at the pictures, but apparently that's not good enough now, because we were talking earlier. But somebody commented this evening about the lack of specifically female nudity in the new book. I mean, I don't know how they know, because the new book's not out. I mean, I've got a proof copy, and he said it was the same thing with chopped meat. As We Belong Dead censoring photographs, don't they like the naked female form? So apparently I'm not doing a very good job with the photo selection. There should be a lot more nudity in this book.
Okay, right.
So
well, I think we if we're going down that route, we need to be, in the 21st century. I think if we are doing that, we need to be at least an equal opportunities book. And
well, I suggested, I'll take some topless shots for the new book. I don't mind, and I'm sure we can find some. Would it be Euro horror? Some undress shots of Demis Roussos.
Yeah. I know Eric is a big Marx Brothers fan. I know you'll be familiar with the line I love to quote about Groucho's review of Samson and Delilah in 1949. You can't show the public a film where the man's tits are bigger than the woman's.
Tell you what, Eric has an idea. I might write a reader's wives letters page as well.
There we go. Get all the writers to pose with the tops off and that, and then do a reader's wives.
That would be real horror, wouldn't it?
Well,
anyways, back to the Euro horror book from topless shots of me. Next up, we've got again Ian, the Ghost.
Yeah,
not that you're a ghost, but your own which is Barbara Steele again.
Yes.
I think this is the third or fourth film in a row. It's Barbara Steele,
and a sort of sequel, although not quite, to L'Orribile Segreto. So tell us about that, Ian.
It is funny how many Barbara Steeles kept cropping up, and you'd think, I'm going to get bored of Barbara floating about the European scenery, looking ethereal and mysterious and all that. Well, absolutely not. She's just absolutely amazing. Married to a Dr. Hitchcock again, but obviously a lot different. I thought, I don't know, I might even prefer this one actually. I just I'm not convinced it was really set in Scotland. That's not it's not the most convincing element of it, but it looks lovely. And then first time you see Barbara Steele in white fur, she looks, I guess, very different to what we imagine in when we seen her in Barbara's first film with her, where she's all in black and definitely looking, even when she's supposed to be a good guy, looking a little bit sinister, but pictured in white furs, more angelic looking than we might expect normally. And beautiful. She looks beautiful. There's no two ways about it.
I suppose this shows her range, really, and I think across the 9 films that she did in Italy, the 9 horror movies that she did there, I think there is real range. And I know you've reviewed Angel for Satan as well for one of our books, and I think she's Barbara Steele in that again, but she's different in that again. And I think across all of those films, there are these sort of degrees of what she can do with that sort of generic character. She always makes it different, sometimes on the side of good, sometimes on the side of evil. In Black Sunday, she's both, and that's the very first movie. So, I think you're absolutely right, Ian, that it's great to see her in these sort of different, the variations on a theme sort of thing.
And visually, again, in this film, once we've got past the murder, she then symbolically changes. She's back into, the black weeds, the widow's weeds at the husband's funeral, and it's just, you got that forest setting. It's so atmospheric, and there's just scene after scene where the beautiful pictures, really, really eerie pictures, and she stands out. It's absolutely brilliant. And we've already mentioned, that Europe's gain was the UK's loss. It's absolutely fantastic. And yeah, I love that film. And again, it's one that I'd never seen before, but you've got all the twists and turns of murdering somebody, and is it successful? Is it not successful? What the hell's going on? Is it a true haunting? Is it some sort of trickery, as in a mini Hitchcock from Hammer or something like that? It's it's a great film, and yet again one of those where just I would have overlooked it if I wasn't sort of bailing Eric out by saying, yeah, I'll do another.
Yeah. Can I just throw in a quick sort of fairly recent story about this film? I was at my local multiplex about 10 years ago, and you know how multiplexes now have those sort of electronic posters on the wall. The old paper posters seems to be a thing of the past. So it's all these sort of frames with electronic designs in. And I walked in, and there were posters up for sort of new movies, probably Avatar or something, And there's a poster up for Lo Spetro, The Ghost, the Ricardo Freda film. I'm thinking, what's that doing there? And it dawned on me a week or two later that someone had obviously Googled it and put the wrong poster up, because they showed, a couple of weeks after that, they showed Roman Polanski's film, The Ghost.
Yeah.
I think he got a bit of a telling off, bless him, whoever it was.
Yeah.
Could have been her, could have been him, who knows. But Simon, you wrote Long Hair of Death. You wrote which I've got,
Barbara
but I've
Steele
not
again.
watched. Barbara Steele again, yeah. It's one I've got, but I've not watched, I've got to say.
This was very much gothic fairy tale. I don't, funny, whether they were trying to emulate Hammer or not, I don't know, because it doesn't really feel like a Hammer. Bizarrely, you kind of watch this film with plagues and thunderstorms, secret passages and unloved marriages. It's weirdly, it's Italy's version of The Castle of Otranto, which of course was the first British Gothic novel. It's got that kind of feel to it. And again, Barbara Steele beguiling, playing a dual role, but there's no sense of repetition there. There's no sense of going through the motions, just doing the same thing over and over, churning it out. It's still a beautifully made film. It's got tremendous atmosphere. And it was funny enough, like Ian, it was one of those that there it was on the list, had an intriguing title. That simply is why I went for it.
I just recently watched, they just released The Long Hair of Death as a media book in Germany. So I was watching that last week. And it struck me, the film, in my mind, it most closely resembled in America was The Pit and the Pendulum, which of course is also Barbara Steele. Yeah, I saw a lot of similarity. But it's again, it was a great film. I sometimes get, when I was doing the research for the book, one of the problems was, like, all these Barbara Steele films kind of come in one section, kind of halfway through the book. And sometimes it's so confusing trying to find the images, because they're not always labeled which film they're from. And a lot of those images could be from any two or three Barbara Steele films. So I had to do a lot of checking to make sure I had the right image for the right film. Because you're right, she doesn't play the same character, but of course physically she looks the same in all of the roles that she plays. The only one I think is very different from the rest is the one she did with Michael Reeves, the Revenge of the Blood Beast, or
The She-Beast, yeah.
Which I think again, that's just come out on Media Book in Germany, and I watched that with a commentary with Ian Ogilvy and Barbara Steele, and she was hilarious because she only did a couple of days' work and she hated the director, apparently, absolutely hated him. And she was she's very, very amusing when she was doing this commentary. But that's very different because she's not in most of the film. She's there at the beginning, and then she disappears for the main section of the film. and it's a bizarre film because it's almost like a classic traditional Italian horror film, but then towards the end there's like a Keystones Cop, Benny Hill police chase. It's just the bizarre thing, It's yeah. So I mean, there's a whole section of the book. Really, we could have just had a whole section just devoted to her.
Yeah, this whole Barbara Steele ubiquity thing is fascinating, because if you look at a movie that she's not in, like Mario Bava's Whip and the Body, there are 2 or 3 female cast members in that film who look like Barbara Steele, and the plot is one that she could easily fit into rather than Dahlia Lavi, and it's so interesting to me that Barbara has gone for a Barbara Steele type in that movie. The other thing to mention about Long Hair of Death as well is how it preempts The Wicker Man by a decade.
Yeah,
it was on British television. I saw that on British television, The Long Hair of Death.
Yes, it was on. Alex Cox showed it on Movie Drome, I think. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh well, I might have watched it then, because
it was on a Sunday night. Yeah.
You mentioned Barbara's Whip and the Body, and I have to say, so before you joined us, Darrell, we had a bit of a discussion about Vampire, which Ian loves, and I explained how over the last 30 years you've tried to get me to at least watch the film.
Not just you, but a few other friends as well. I know a lot of haters, and
it's never
it's a masterpiece.
But the Whip and the Body is another one that everyone praises. People say it's Barbara's best work, and I find it so tedious and dull. And I don't know. Perhaps I'm missing something. Perhaps it needs an ape man in there.
I think both of those films are a certain type, I think, and I can sort of understand why there are fans that don't take to them, but I think those of us that do just get on with the business of loving them, and we forget what anyone else says. They're fantastic, and if we like them and we get something out of them, we don't really care all that much if other people don't. I'm not going to make an issue of it. I'm not going to say you must watch it, you must like it, but you either do or you don't. But those of us that love those films. And I think this is the case in general for Euro horror as well. I think there was a time, these films were being shown in British cinemas in the 60s and 70s, and not all audiences took to them, and they were laughed off the screen a little bit. And then they started getting shown on TV a little in the 80s with things like Black Sunday and Long Hair of Death and so on. And even then, there'd be even Jess Franco films started turning up on ITV, and the presenters would always sort of apologise for them at the end. And I think it's been a gradual thing that people have sort of been educated into what a European horror film is, and how I think you have to watch them in a different way. And hopefully our book will contribute to the literature on that, and help and be a sort of guide to people to say, look, these films, they're sort of the same, but they're sort of different, and they've got elements in it that you'll recognise. But as you've just said about Revenge of the Blood Beast, it's unconventionally conventional or conventionally unconventional to a point. It's got all the sort of Euro horror cliches in, and then goes off on these odd tangents. And I think it's those sort of scenes. It's the odd, weird bits that people can't quite understand or grasp, that you need to sort of educate people on in magazine articles, on Blu-ray extras, in books like ours. And hopefully, as you say, David Pirrie was perhaps the first person to write about these films in a way that took them seriously. And then I think all the literature and all of the talk and discussion that has come along since sort of relates back to his approach. I think it's great that people are sort of being educated and going out and educating themselves, and hopefully our book, as I say, will be a further contribution to that.
I think one of the problems that you have with Euro horror is, first and foremost, a lot of fans don't like watching subtitled movies.
Yeah.
So
or indeed obviously dubbed ones.
yes,
Yeah.
I mean, where possible. I mean, the great thing about the Blu-ray releases is often you get the choice of seeing it dubbed or in the original language. I mean, I always prefer the original language where possible.
Yeah.
And I think the other problem with some of them, especially some of them in the 60s and 70s, is people were used to like Hammer and Amicus and AIP with a very linear story. And a lot of the Euro horrors, I'm thinking particularly of Jean Roland's films, they don't have a traditional storyline. They've almost dreamlike quality. Last night, and this is a big regret for me, I only saw, I'm a huge Roland fan, but last night was the first time I watched the Night of what's it called, Night of the Hunted.
Night of the Hunted. Yeah.
I was blown away by it. I thought it was what amazing. Sadly, it's not in the book because I didn't never even cross my mind to add that one.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of his vampire stuff in there. But I would imagine an audience raised on Hammer and Amicus now would just be completely baffled by a film like that, or Iron Rose, which is another fantastic film.
I think even Euro horror fans, even seasoned fans of this stuff, might be baffled by a filmmaker like Roland, because you can appreciate his individual films, but I think he's a filmmaker where you have to look at the whole body of work. I think it all connects together, and not necessarily. I don't mean it fits together like a jigsaw. I don't think that the pieces sort of interlock and tell a whole story, but I think there's a sort of grand design there. I think the individual films are the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, really, and I think you have to watch several of his films in order to pick up on the repeat themes, on the use of the same actors, on the use of the beach at Dieppe and all that sort of thing, all of the imagery, and you see this repeated from film to film. And I think once you've watched 2 or 3 of his films and you see the same sort of things popping up in them, the clowns and things like that, you do start to realize, there's more going on in the big picture than there is in any one of the individual films. And I think why Night of the Hunted gets a good reputation is that it's probably his best movie in terms of actually being a sort of coherent 90 minutes, and not necessarily having to fit into this Roland world. It's a good film in its own right, whereas I think a lot of his other films work best if you see them as part of a gigantic picture.
I think I'm trying to think of my vampires. I'll be in the first one I see. Pre-cert VHS it would be. My dad had hired it. He didn't have a clue, he just seen the title. And he wasn't a fan. I didn't mind it. I was just a kid. And it was obviously opened my eyes a little bit, to say the least. And going to school the next day and telling my mates I'd just watched this film. And they were like, yeah, of course your dad let you watch that. I'm like, honest to God, you didn't realize what it was. You know what I mean? Because we had no censorship, which I think I've mentioned before. When I was a kid, I got to watch all sorts before I should have. But back to Ian, Black Sabbath, one of Bava's greatest films, and one of the greatest anthology films. It's fantastic.
It absolutely is. I could still watch that, and it still freaks me out. That bit of the you knew I was going to say that, but it's just so scary, and the atmosphere is tremendous. And of course, you've got this thing where you got the 2 different cuts of the film.
Yeah.
I always go for the original, and people moan about wanting Boris Karloff's voice or whatever, but I don't know. I just feel that the American cut just kind of spoils things by sometimes just spelling too much out or overemphasizing, and just let Bava do his magic.
Well, it completely changes one story, totally, doesn't it? the telephone ones.
The one with the
Yeah.
phone calls. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why? I don't know. And the order of the films, the order of the episodes as well, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Which
you know,
the
they're
American
all,
version was the first version I saw.
yeah.
Now, what's the cliche that people always say about anthology films is, they usually have one terrible episode. You know, here's the film that is the exception to the rule. You know, just quality all the way through, whatever order it's in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, and then so you got the phone one, which is, you know, much more of a sort of psycho thriller vibe to it in the main, and just in the one room, and the tension is incredible, and one or two twists. I know. Darrell will say he knew what was coming all the time. You pride yourself on knowing your twists, don't you? But I thought it was a really good one for, you know, keeping people guessing. I reckon a lot of people would have been blindsided by some of the things that were going on.
I think Mario got me on that one, Ian. You know,
Did he?
90% of the time I'm good on twists, but I've got to say Black Sabbath got me. So
yeah, and then the Boris Karloff episode with the Wordle Act. That again, tremendous and really quite disturbing at times as well. I think again you get the feeling that a UK film based on similar lines would pull its punches a little bit more in certain areas of it, you know. And then that doll of that woman, I keep going back to that.
Oh, chocolate water,
the dripping tap, you know, and it's just how anybody can just create that sort of intense atmosphere and just keep that as thick an atmosphere, as sinister an atmosphere as Bava does. It's just anybody who wants to make a horror film should be forced to watch Mario Bava and say, right, that's how you do it. That's how you do it. It's absolutely one of my favourite anthology films, and I do love an anthology film.
Don't we all? Don't we all? We've done a podcast on a rough guide to the amateur anthologies, and it was fantastic. It was great fun because I brought up on them. But there's so many great anthologies. But Black Sabbath's possibly, you know, one of the best, if not the best, that's out there.
Yeah. And I even love the ending with Boris Karloff on his horse, and then all of the studio and all of that. You know, I have no idea why people
it's lovely to see all that artifice and that whole reveal is just such a joy. Yeah.
And I bet Karloff loved that bit.
Oh,
you know, I bet just something different for him. You know, great film, absolute genius.
And we've already kind of slightly discussed, but sticking with Ian, the whip and the body. It's a lot of Ian. Let's just be honest. It's a lot of Ian. You know,
it's just I obviously wrote about a lot of 60s ones. That's why I'm appearing a lot at the moment. I'm with Eric. You know, it's not, for all I love Bava, it's not my favourite. It's not my favourite, and I'm not sure I can entirely put my finger on it. But I think there are a lot of the times where I just felt, I've seen this. You know, right down to Christopher Lee on horseback, riding along the coast towards the castle, like is straight out of a Roger Corman film.
It is. It's a blatant Corman, isn't it? And clearly that's the sort of intention and the design of it. I think Bava brings a lot of himself to it, though, and I get a lot out of it. Even as a fan of the film, I would say it's sort of lesser Bava. But when lesser Bava means 8.5 out of 10, you know, you can't complain, can you?
And
no.
I got a little bit distracted by Christopher Lee's wig as well.
I love the fact that when he's killed in the film, which isn't a spoiler, believe it or not.
No.
When he's killed in the film, he appears to be killed by an animated curtain.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty strange sort of murder scene, you know. But yeah, he's what do we think about Lee's European sort of sojourns? Because you know it's far from his only Euro horror, and I think he's pretty good in this, and he's good. He seemed to like working with Barber. We did a couple of times. What do we think about Christopher in Europe?
I think he's decent. Of course, he's decent.
Well, he's always decent. It's Christopher Lee, isn't it? So,
but
Even when he's working with a director like Jeff Franco,
yeah, Christopher
supposed to
Lee.
get shafted.
Yeah, Christopher Lee is probably, for me, third in the pecking order behind Cushing and Price.
Same here. Yeah.
You know, so I like Lee, but I don't love Lee as much as the others. But I think he can be great. I think in another one I wrote about, Castle of the Living Dead, I think he's only a small role, but I think he's tremendous in that. It's really quite creepily insane, really. It's you know, and that's a good one. But of course, he's doing this little bits of filming and then away on his toes to the next one while they're still filming. So he appears to be in about 56,000 films within 1 year.
Yeah.
And,
would you say the reason you don't like him as much as Cushing and Price is that they come across as a little bit warmer than he does, and as though they're having a little bit more fun in their films? But having said that, would that then be of benefit to Lee in working in the sort of icy atmosphere of Euro horror?
Well, I think his big advantage, of course, is he was the master of so many languages, so he could use his own voice in so many films. Whereas Cushing,
he is a European, really, rather than a Brit. You know, he's a citizen of the world, sort of thing.
And of course, Peter Cushing very rarely dipped his foot in Euro horror. He was very happy to stay in Britain and do stuff. You know, he went and did Tender Dracula and Horror Express. I can't think of any others he did in Europe. Whereas Lee, for Lee as well, of course, it was a financial thing because the tax man was after him. So he kind of relocated to Europe for a while. But because he had the command of the languages, you know, he spoke fluent German and French and Spanish and Italian. I think it opened a lot more doors to him. I think he has, I mean, he's my least favorite as well. But I think this impression a lot of people have of him being very cold, distant person. I mean, I don't think that's actually very accurate. I mean, if you talk to people who worked with him or knew him, he's actually a very funny man and a very warm man. But my problem with him is really that, unlike Peter Cushing, Vincent Price, they were never ashamed of the thing. They were acknowledged the fact they were famous because of these horror movies, and it gave them work, and they were happy to do them. Whereas Lee wanted to distance himself so much from them, and he kind of looked down on them. I think he mellowed in his later years about that, but yeah.
I think they all went through a phase of trying to distance themselves, to be fair, but I think Cushing probably gave up sooner and just got on with it. Whereas probably Christopher Lee was just very vocal and disparaging, really, in what he sometimes said, and even flew in the face of the facts, really, with, you know, how few horror films he'd done since 1970 or whatever. And you think, come off it, mate. Come on. But
come on, he done Howling 2 and Return of Captain Invincible.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think I'd be more embarrassed of Return of Captain Invincible than any of the horror stuff.
Yeah.
And he did a Police Academy film.
Oh yeah,
never known the horrors.
And turned
Darrell, you mentioned that Cushing was perhaps, you know, a warmer personalities, but equally, I'd argue that Cushing could play cold and clinical.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Brilliantly.
I actually think, you know, Cushing had more range at the end of the day, and that's that. And I suppose, you know, Chris, obviously his stature, he's perfect for that looming, ominous sort of monolithic character almost. And
authority person kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, and maybe that's limiting. I don't know. Maybe that it's not that I don't like Christopher Lee in these films at all, and I don't believe that he was a terribly, completely arrogant, pompous man with no sense of humour. I don't believe that either. But I just think I just find more to enjoy in a Peter Cushing performance. But as I say, Castle of the Living Dead, I think that's absolutely joyful. He's thoroughly enjoying himself for the small amount of time he's there, and he's a very unsettling character in it. Visually, a little bit different as well. Just when he's sitting watching the visitors to the castle performing, and he's his very eccentric way of enjoying himself. It's quite unnerving. I wouldn't have stayed in that castle. I'd have been off. I'd have gone.
I must admit, my watch list is going up because there's quite a few of these I've not seen. Which when you think you've watched a lot of Euro horror, and then you go, "I've not seen that. I've not seen that. I've not seen that." So there's my watch list is going up, and I'll be going searching for quite a few of them tonight online. I think. Not that I should be doing things like that. Let's be honest, but sometimes needs must. But with Castle of the Living Dead, Terror Creatures from the Grave, Ian. Another Ian. It's Ian again.
Yeah.
Who was Simon sitting there going, "When's it my turn?"
I know.
I wait for 70s to happen.
Was I even in it? Was I even in it? But I mean, first of all, Terror Creatures from the Grave. What a terrible title, I think.
Barbara Steele again.
Barbara Steele, yeah. And I think anything that Barbara Steele's in deserves a more lyrical title than Terror Creatures from the Grave. Simple as. But again, we've got that lovely sort of black and white imagery of this wonderful actress, and you've got Luciano Pigozzi again in there, who seems to crop up in a million films playing some sort of creepy supporting character with his mad eyeballs, and he's pretty impressive in this as a gardener. And it's just I suppose because I ended up watching Barbara Steele after Barbara Steele after Barbara Steele, and then when there was another on the list that hadn't been claimed, I thought, yeah, I've got to get into this one as well because I was just enjoying it so much. But eventually, I suppose, watching them almost back to back as I was, we're getting a lot of Barbara Steele drifting around, obviously looking like Barbara Steele, being sinister and all of that or whatever. And there's a danger of becoming a much of a muchness. Not that it deserves to be said, but I'm not surprised Steele didn't want to just keep doing that forever, because she must have thought, "Where's my career going here? This is all I'm going to be."
Yeah,
now.
I'm just doing all these films that seem to be very similar but very different. But she brought, as we said earlier on, she brought something different to every role she was in.
Yeah,
in the Italian films.
Yeah, I found with this one there was a little bit. It seemed a bit uneven at times. A little bit of throwing a bit of a comedy interlude with I think it's the maid honking a car horn, and you think, do we need that? I don't think we need that, but so a little bit unbalanced at times, particularly when it's a patient sort of storyline. It takes its time, and the last thing you need is that kind of lovely slow burn being punctured by
interrupted by car horns,
comedy car horns, But lovely locations again, and Steele looks lovely in it, but I don't think she's got that much to get her teeth into here, to be honest. You know, in one respect, but it's nice. I think if anybody watches any of these Steele films and think I love this actress, they are going to end up loving everything that they see here. Again, is this my favourite? No, it's not. And I think it's a title that gets commented about quite a lot. I get the feeling, rightly or wrongly, that a lot of people love it. But again, it's another one that's not one of my favourites. But that's part of the challenge in being involved in a book like this, finding the stuff to appreciate, pointing out the stuff that people will enjoy. But, you know, occasionally just saying, you know, perhaps that could have been done differently. And maybe it's humour that does or doesn't travel well across countries. I don't know. Do we need the
can sometimes find that. But, you know, well, I'm going to flash forward and we're going to go to Simon.
Oh,
Mark of the Devil.
Oh, yes.
Directed by Michael Armstrong, Herbert Lom, Udo Kier, you know, Reggie Nelder. Great cast, great film. And it's just had four failures, hasn't it?
I think it's one of two films I cover that are basically following in the footsteps of Witchfinder General.
Yeah.
The other one being The Bloody Judge. It's probably not the best film ever made. It's one of those things. There's lots of little bits in it to enjoy. You know, you got Herbert Lom kind of doing what he would do later in and Now the Screaming Starts, playing a decadent aristocrat who basically instigates these witch trials just to get his end away and just to hoard trinkets. That's simply what he does. And you got the wonderful what was his name? Reginald Nelder.
Yeah.
That weaselly pinched face. Just he walks into the inn and immediately you think, oh, I don't like him. Udo Kier, just being wonderfully unsubtle as ever. And I think it's one of those films that, again, poor Michael Armstrong found it sort of got interfered with. Like House on Haunted Hill. Not House on Haunted Hill, what am I saying? Haunted House of Horror.
Yeah.
That was a film where basically they interfered with it and added scenes that he didn't do. With this one, he had a producer that he fell out with. So originally, it was going to be even more derivative. I think it was going to be called The Witch Hunter Dr. Dracula, which kind of says all you need to know about the tone of it, not necessarily taking itself too seriously. But I think Michael Armstrong wanted to tell something a bit more serious, a bit like Michael Reeves did, trying to sort of tell the truth about the witches weren't really witches. They were just innocent women. But basically, I think all the torture scenes just kind of made it a bit exploitative. And any attempts on Michael Armstrong's part to make it a serious treaty kind of got lost when they made, and I've actually got one here, a Mark of the Devil vomit bag. Which actually says, this vomit bag and the price of one admission will enable you to see the first film rated V for violence. And I think also, it's not the first, but it was one of the, not the earliest, I should say, but I think possibly the second earliest film to be prosecuted under the video nasties debacle. Don't think it was ever banned, but they certainly had a look at it and thought, "Whoa!"
I never got banned.
No, I think they just kind of had a look at it and thought, "Should we?" and had a bit of a debate about it, or a mass debate with all of them, I'm sure. And
they probably didn't even watch it. Like they didn't watch half of them.
I don't think they did. I think one thing they did do, they made a compilation clip reel of every single bit of violence, put them all together. So you've got mock executions from Faces of Death, and you've got bits from all these I Spit on Your Grave, and just made a reel totally out of context and just like for 3 minutes of butchering, raping, and goodness knows what. And that was it. The pretext, they would either just see that reel, just look at a title, and that was it really. That was enough to have them seized and sometimes banned. But this one just about escaped the banning.
I think it's on section 3. I mean, I've just watched all 72 of the section 1 and 2 over October, and there's 10 hours of my life that possibly I'm not going to get back, because there was a few in there, the likes of Cannibal Terror and
SS Experiment Camp.
there was some I didn't mind, but there was some that were just atrocious.
But what's so funny about that is,
movies.
yeah, and that's the funny thing. If they'd have just been left alone, no one would remember them. You ban them, and suddenly
this raises an issue.
2000, everyone wants to own them. It's that whole thing about telling a kid you can't have that, and it might be something really hideous, most awful acid drops, any kind of sweet you don't like. But if you're told you can't have them, you instantly want them. So suddenly, that's it. Everyone watched them, and there was this mass sort of, is that it? And you can tell that's a mannequin with ketchup on it. So all these films, a lot of them, to be honest, they don't deserve to be banned, but they don't deserve the legacy they've got now.
Yeah.
A lot of them should have just faded into obscurity, apart from a few exceptions, like Tenebrae, oddly. It seems odd that a film so artistically made could be banned for so long.
As the conversations turn to the sort of video nasty era, I think you can relate that to Euro horror, because I think there was a sort of sense almost of racism involved in the films that were prosecuted, because a lot of the furore around video nasties, a big part of it seemed to be the weirdness of these films, the fact that they weren't like what you could watch on television, they weren't like Hammer films. This batch of films suddenly appeared in video shops up and down the high street, and they've got this indefinable quality to them that was sort of unusual. And what we now know as the sort of traits of Euro horror were quite a shock to people that were new to them, and especially if you were an MP or you were a policeman or somebody in a job where you had to watch this stuff because you were being told to. You'd have never seen anything like it before, and as such, your response to seeing something that you'd never seen anything like before would naturally be to sort of turn against it and look for the bad things in it, and I think a lot of the time, certainly the cliche is that, oh yeah, it was the violence that people looked at and they didn't like, and these films were banned because of that. I think it was the general sort of odd tone of them that put a lot of people off. It was like, we can't have this stuff coming into Britain and sort of challenging the way that we look at a certain type of cinema. In fact, there were even quotes from people at the time where they were saying things like, oh, these films aren't like the old Hammer movies that you've grown up watching on TV. Yeah. And of course, the irony there is that Hammer got exactly the same treatment in the 1950s. That had been conveniently forgotten 20 years later. But yeah, I do think, as we're talking about Euro horror, I think there is that sort of connection between where these films were from and the sort of attitudes on the continent, and I think that was as disturbing to the British establishment as any of the violence.
I think if you compare like Euro horrors in the 60s and 70s to the stuff that, say, Hammer was doing, it makes Hammer appear quite quaint and homely. Whereas in Europe, they were really pushing the boundaries in terms of violence and nudity and sexual imagery and that.
And combining the two, sex and horror together, that was the big sense of no-no in Britain in the 60s.
And even something as basic as the dubbing on the films gave them a sort of distance. There was that extra little weird layer there where the voices didn't quite match the lip movements. And you can imagine people watching that, and some people maybe laughing at it, others just something going on in their brains telling them this doesn't happen when we watch a Peter Cushing movie. Why are the voices so sort of disembodied? And not quite understanding why, because not everyone in the audience in the 60s and early 70s would have known what the dubbing process was. It would have been this mystifying extra layer to the films. And I do think there are these sort of mysterious qualities within the movies and within the production of the films that made them something that had to be stamped out, something that had to be that couldn't be sort of unleashed on the British public. And okay, the violence and the sex and the nudity were part of that, as they always are in these things. But I do think there was this level of this is too weird for Britain. We can't have this, you know.
I mean, what I found interesting.
Dissonance, is it a good or a bad thing? Sorry, Eric.
No, you know. I was saying what I found interesting putting the book together, as I said earlier before Darrell joined us, that you have 4 major countries: Germany, France, Italy, and Spain. France is interesting because that's really where the movies began with the Lumiere brothers, and then Méliès, and then nothing until after really.
Yeah. Well, when we did our French issue of We Belong Dead, that was one of the things we wanted to focus on, the fact that France isn't a constant in horror. There are these massive gaps in French horror history. But when France becomes important in horror, it changes the game. It invented the horror film. It reinvented it in the mid-50s. Roland came along and completely, changed the sort of artistic angle. And then you got the French New Extremity in the early 2000s. And it again completely re-kick-started what a horror film was. And so you get these huge 20, 30, 40-year gaps in France where nothing's happening in horror. And then suddenly, not only does horror emerge in France, but it's a complete game changer. They show every 30 years, they seem to sort of show the way, right?
And then after France comes Germany between the wars. The Weimar Republic becomes the home of the horror film, really, doesn't it? All the classics. And then again, nothing for decades in Germany. And Italy, Italy gave us Barber, who then led to Argento. But for me, the most interesting is Spain.
Yeah.
Because those films, on the surface, they're very good horror films, but also very political films, because they're really made under the dictatorship of Franco. And, we've all heard the stories about, when, for example, when we're making The Tombs of the Blind Dead, you couldn't set it in Spain, because it was very, this wouldn't happen in Spain. So they had to set it in Portugal. And a lot of these directors were very, very political. But even in France, Jean Rollin was very political, very left-wing, anarchist leanings. And a lot of their films were attacks on the establishment as well. I mean, for most fans, they just enjoy it as a horror film, which is fantastic as well, But I think the European horror film is a lot more political than
The House of Scream. That was another one, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, fantastic film. You compare. I mean, we all love the Hammer films, of course, but I mean, Hammer could be political. Plague of the Zombies, I think, is a very political film, looking at the class system in Britain.
They were very anti-imperialist, weren't they? Sometimes,
yes,
like in that film, like in The Stranglers of Bombay. The British don't come well out of it.
No. And another thing Hammer did well in terms of sort of social issues, if not entirely political, was they were great backers of young characters. They were films where the youthful characters were the sort of fighting force, against the older establishment. So yeah, there's definitely that line in there of something going on. Whether it gets as overtly political as Plague of the Zombies, it doesn't always, but certainly there are these social issues that are being addressed under the surface. And but yeah, as you say, Eric, I think in Europe and in Spain in particular, because of the peculiarities of that country and how it was being run, there's almost always a sort of political edge to their horror.
So I'm going to put this out to Eric and Darrell, because you've obviously, which has been the favourites that you've seen written about, the films?
One of my favourites, this is one I gave to Ian, whether he's great. It's a film I love. It's a very recent film, actually. It's a Polish film. The only I've actually got the soundtrack, which is fantastic. It's a Polish disco vampire mermaid film called Lure, Lure. Absolutely fantastic. It's a bonkers film, completely bonkers. And I knew nothing
It's my
about
favourite subgenre.
It's what?
My favourite subgenre. I love a Polish vampire mermaid film.
Don't we all?
It showed in your review.
It's just so out there and so bizarre, but thoroughly. It's just unlike anything else I'd ever seen. So, I love that. But I love the like Nosferatu, of course, the original. I'm not a fan of the remake. I have to say, the
What's your
Herzog.
thoughts on the new remake that's coming?
Well, that I'm looking forward to. I have to admit, I think that he could do quite a good job of that. But the original, I mean, it's so iconic, and there's so many iconic images from that movie. And it's strange because after that, really until something like Salem's Lot, vampires were not portrayed in that way as a plague-ridden vermin. They were always like the Bela Lugosi or Christopher Lee, kind of seductive figure. But Max Schreck is he is amazing in that movie. Like, it's 100 years old, isn't it now? Nosferatu. Yeah. Still, I could watch that film countless times. The same, with Suspiria. Absolutely love Suspiria. I still don't think I quite understand the whole, but I don't think it's a film you understand, really.
Talking about Suspiria, I've just screened a scan of a 35mm print in October, and it looked beautiful, and it was fantastic, and it was coming through some really good speakers, and blew everybody away. And I was so chuffed to be screening that. It was for my birthday. So,
and the other ones I would say I really loved were the two Demons films from Italy, from Lamberto Bava. Absolutely loved those, and the Rec films. And actually, last night I just got from Spain the whole box set of all 4 Rec films, but also the documentary about the making of the film. And I just think those films are just, they were so different. I do believe Rec was probably the highest grossing Spanish film outside of Spain ever made, at least at the time of its release. And it was doing so. Normally, I'm not a big fan of these found footage films, but I thought it was so well done. And it shows, like European cinema, well, like all cinema really, is evolving all the time, and so, I love the silent.
It's got the biggest audience it could ever have now because it's also, accessible.
Yes. I mean, I said at the beginning of the conversation, there were films afterwards. I think, well, why did we put that in, or why didn't we put this in? And one of the films that I watched again recently, Thesis, the Spanish film. I don't know if you've seen that, which is just.
I've not seen it.
And it's about this student who goes looking into somebody she thinks has made a snuff movie, but it's amazing, absolutely amazing film. But there was also difficulties in what is a Euro horror, because at one point I was going to include Vincent Price's, I think, only excursion into Euro territory, which was the Italian co-production of The Last Man on Earth. But is that Euro horror? And that's a difficulty when you have lots of these films are co-productions.
Yeah,
it's how do you define what's so it's subjective. At the end.
I think we could have got away with that as an that is primarily an Italian movie for me, but
I would have said it was Euro horror.
Yeah, I can see the dilemma there, definitely.
But then we had Horror Express, which you could also argue is that Euro horror. Well, yeah, I think it is because it's Spanish production, but
yeah. But it's got such a British sensibility to it, and of course, it's a British co-production officially as well. So, it is a difficult area. And then you get, I mean, Simon mentioned Mark of the Devil, and you get into sort of Harry Alan Towers territory, and he's this dodgy British businessman who's having to make films in Europe in order to do all these strange financial deals, you know. And
there's also about 2 or 3 different countries involved, so you think something's been squirred away somewhere.
Oh yes, yeah. They're more sort of money laundering exercises than movies, but yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, I think I've kept you gentlemen long enough. We've been at this for about an hour and a half now, with a little bit of stop-starting at the start. But is there anything you'd like to get in before we close this up about the book?
Well,
it went out, Eric.
So
it's early January, isn't it?
The printers are going to deliver it on the 2nd of January. Unfortunately, it was this time of the year, everyone closes down for 2 weeks, basically. But I got my proof copy, and it looks absolutely fantastic. Again, Steve Kirkham's wonderful design, and of course, wonderful cover by Mr. Graham Humphreys, and actually an equally good back cover by Brooks as well. Quite like that. And it's how many pages is it? 356 pages, all in colour, and it's going to be available as a hardback or as a softback. And it's already available for pre-ordering. We've had quite a few pre-orders in already from the website.
I'll my pre-order in.
And we're actually trying we've got a new printer as from this book. But I'm very happy with the quality of it, and so that's going to be available from the first week in January, and then we can start working on the next year's books. And then, of course, we've got the magazine under the editorship of Darrell here, going from strength to strength, and next issue will be out January. Is it January?
Hopefully late Jan or early Feb. Yeah, we've got a writer's deadline of January the 5th, which hopefully everyone will stick to. And so hopefully we should have it out within a month of that. So late Jan, early Feb. And then after the next issue, we're doing a bunch of themed issues through 2024 again. We're doing a Dracula special. We're doing a double Japanese issue in June, July. And then we're doing, following up from our book Chopped Meat, which looked at British horror of the 70s, we're doing a special themed issue on British horror films of another decade. And it's a decade that I don't think people are going to, if I ask you to guess which decade it was, I don't think anyone would get it right. So an intriguing era of British cinema there. And so that's on the way sort of later in the year. That's going to be our last issue of the year in about a year's time. So hopefully we can keep the mag going, and we're really looking forward to the Japanese issue in the summer, which I think is special. The plan is we're going to bring out 2 issues on the same day, which is something we've never done before. I'm covering 2 halves of Japanese horror, so
I'm looking forward to the Japanese horror, I must admit. And has Simon and Ian got anything else to say before we close up matters?
Well, they both have.
I'm quite looking forward to. So one article I'm doing for the magazine, it's going to be looking at actors in Last of the Summer Wine and their horror connections.
That's right.
Just so I could call it, I Know What You Did, Last of the Summer Wine.
Eric's going to have fun looking for the pictures for that.
For me, I would say that whether it's about the books or the magazines, and whether it's how Eric started this off and carried it for so long, and now Darrell obviously is doing the editorial stuff whilst Eric sits in his secret HQ stroking his cat. What we've always had is such an amazing variety. You get your favourite films, of course you do, but you get a lot more sort of either obscure, unwritten about, dare I say, unsung, or borderline, you know. And it, for me, in an upcoming magazine, I'm doing an overview of Bela Lugosi's lesser films and an overview of Charles Bronson's dalliances with the genre. And it's that kind of, we can go anywhere.
Yeah, we've had you covering Clint Eastwood in the past, even.
Yeah.
You know, Clint Eastwood horror star, and digging out the horror in Clint Eastwood movies, which is you know, and so yeah, this is an area that we want to look at, and
I hope 10 to Midnight's in there for Charles Bronson, because that's certainly a slasher film.
Of course, yeah. But that's the point. I mean, I don't know who else is going to such polar extremes as We Belong Dead.
The magazine's brilliant, it is. And everybody, get yourself the book pre-ordered, get the magazine pre-ordered every month. You can get it on Amazon as well, straight to you. Get it done. It's worth it. You'll enjoy the magazine. And these are some of the faces who write those articles that you'll enjoy in the future. So I'd just like to say thank you, gentlemen, for coming on.
Yeah, and thank you, Paul, for being a gracious host, and thanks for all the plugs just now as well. That's great.
Absolutely, yes, thank you.
No, I plug you on the page as well. We've got just under 12,000 on there now, which has shot up double in the last year.
Wow,
which is brilliant. So a lot of hard work on the Carlisle Cult Cinemacast page and the podcast. But no, I'd like to thank you. Stick around after I close off, and we'll have a quick chat. But no, thank you all for being here. I'm sure I'll get these on again because I've thoroughly enjoyed tonight. It's been good crack. I've been PD. That's been Simon, Eric, Ian, and Darrell. Thank you all for coming on. Good night. God bless. And it's been the Carlisle Cult Cinemacast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There we go.